G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks Off, Ukraine War Update for the 27th of December 2025. Now, an amazing piece of news just happened, and while I was getting ready to prepare, as you can see, Russia has launched a massive attack on Ukraine, massive missile attack. Now, I actually said this yesterday, that I've said it before, as the war intensifies, as it gets closer to the end, Russia will increase its attacks. And I said yesterday that Russia has the option and will destroy systematically parts of Ukraine if they refuse to give up land. And yesterday, Zelensky, after being told that the only way Russia will stop attacking is if Ukraine agrees to recognize the land that Russia has taken. And Zelensky said, no, Ukraine will not give up 1 inch. Russia has to withdraw. I thought it would take a month. I was wrong. Russia started its systematic destruction of the Ukrainian economy today. How fast and how often they strike is yet to be, of course, revealed. But as you can see, they started with Kiev and hit their usual targets, except for Sumy, right here, and a couple of targets. They hit Odessa, but Mykolaiv and some out here. Again, I said they won't hit, but it's not as intense as I predicted. But of course, it's still intense. Now, there's no word on exactly how many targets were hit, but it was a systematic destruction of... it happened after my broadcast yesterday. Well after. And yes, come Ukrainian evening, they hit various infrastructure and then launched more. That was an assortment of ballistic cruise and air-launched missiles in order to avoid and confuse Ukrainian offenses. And Ukraine came up with the excuse that they all were they were launched by Belarus to confuse Russia. No. Even Ukraine admitted they were launched initially from the Black Sea. Right? Are you telling me all those missiles flew across here? No. Right? They were launched. They even say so. They launched them from up here, Tu-22s. Of course, Ukraine leaves out the fact that they struck. Look at that! They claim to have struck a Russian position. Point on this photo and tell me where's the Russians. Ukraine 20-point plan is radically different from what Russia is discussing with the US, according to the Russians, and radically different from the 27 points initially proposed by Trump. Did I not tell you yesterday that Zelensky's trying to make it his peace deal and that he thinks that he can just sit there, fold his arms and say, I'm not negotiating, and thinks that's a valid tactic that will end the war? I mean, of course, all the assholes and well-to-dos on Facebook will always say, this is David and Goliath. Little David's going to win this war. Ukraine ain't David. Ukraine is not a moral country. The memorandum that was supposed to... Budapest memorandum never said that if Ukraine went around murdering the civilians, we have to turn a blind eye, hear no evil, speak no evil about Ukraine. No. Ukraine kicked the bear and found out. Okay? But because people are assholes, they can't take the fact that they're wrong. And they can't prove me wrong, so they take it out on me. I'm just the bearer of bad news. I'm not the one who... I have not... I'm trying to... This is the problem. Some people are so used to propaganda and getting told what they want to hear that they hate the truth. The further society drifts from the truth, the more they hate people who tell the truth. Which explains why so many lying assholes are popular on YouTube. Because they pander and they're greedy. They don't care about you. They just know that you're an asshole. Sorry. They know liberals are assholes who only want to be told what they want to hear. Sorry. You guys aren't assholes. Unless you want to be. But, no. I'm not calling you guys assholes. I'm saying liberals who listen to this channel, they come, listen for a few minutes, then they hit the thumbs down button. Most of the time, they never watch the whole video. They just don't want to know the truth. Now, apparently, I'm told that this view bombing is what's screwing with the YouTube algorithms. Again, this is the problem with YouTube. They don't have an honest... It's not an honest platform with an honest system. Now, yesterday, of course, there was a lot of attacks. And, of course, the Ukrainians still claim to have captured all of Kupiansk and driven Russians back. Yeah. Lie. But there is some areas where Russia has stalled. Again, deliberate death trap. Although, yeah... I'm not saying that they're having an easy time or a good time, or that Ukraine is a pushover, but in areas they have captured more territory, and other areas they have not. But they've progressed past Seversk, past Yampri. In other areas they still stalled. No intention to move forward until they have met all their goals, because they don't want to be in range in the artillery and missiles that Ukraine has put in its little fortress towns. But there are some areas where they're weak enough that the Russians can bring up artillery and then sit and hold and bombard those positions. But they seem to be in no hurry. Of course, that's all part of the Russian strategic goal of the process known as the Russian grind. Now, there's the Russian cauldron. These are the death traps where you leave one little juicy morsel at the bottom of the cauldron, and Ukraine just can't help themselves but reach in, and then they get fired upon by one side or the other. Now, they don't... I remember, or somebody will say, but you catch each other in the firing line. No, you don't. The cauldron is a V. It's outwards. Okay, it may look like, yeah, they've done that, but the guns are not, right? Only when they're firing on, right? They don't fire all the way, right? They know their ranges, okay? They know their positions. It is called crossfire, and it has been done by the Americans before. It's been done by the British, Crossfire is a legitimate military target. Okay? Don't believe your Robert De Niro movies. Sure, in short, confined space when there are times and places for strategies as well. And it also depends on the dictates of protecting your flanks. And that by having two close areas, you can switch between the two while keeping one area at the back constantly manned, enabling you to have three fronts but only two armies. Now, you of course have fighting at Myriad with little progress there. The death trap at Pavlovsk continues to lure Ukrainians into the rail station. They haven't learned their lesson yet. Now, there's been some progress here, but not much. fighting has resumed here. The Russians have stopped advancing. The Ukrainians, they've found the Ukrainians, dug in, of course. Fighting continues here with no progress. Lots of progress here. Now, the map has updated, right? The Russians have captured most of Huliaipole, but the map has not updated. Now, it has been disputed. There is fighting in Huliaipole. The Russians haven't captured all of Huliaipole. The media is now in denial. We'll get to that shortly. Now, the Russians, sorry, got this out of order. Al Jazeera is reporting that the Ukrainian capital came under massive attack earlier in the morning. I thought that was actually at night. The attacks continued until early morning. They claim air defences were in operations, but were only able to warn of impending missiles. There are conflicting reports that there was only machine gun fire. Some said there were some missiles in the air. The Ukrainian interceptor drones allegedly were launched. Nothing happened. Now, in the past, most of the cruise missiles that have hit targets have been denied. This time they're actually reporting that they hit energy infrastructure, but they're also at the same time claiming that only civilians died. Women and children, of course. Now, there was an attack on a freight train. They claim it was at Kovel. No, it came out of Kovel. As it across the border from Poland, it was hit. Russians put ambush drones on the tracks, and when the train came, they just popped up and dropped. They just basically, they didn't have to move. Train goes over and boom, like landmines. But there were drone attacks elsewhere as well, and in a separate attack on another, they hit Odessa. Now, the Ukrainians are claiming they attacked out of the territory of Belarus. That is incorrect. Now, they're claiming to focus on, Russian deep strikes and drone attacks because their interceptor drones aren't working. I've seen the interceptor drones. They're like a hand grenade with a propeller on top. You know, they're ridiculous. They have almost no flight time. Whoever came up with these interceptor drones, it's obviously just some scammer who read something in a sci-fi magazine once. Right? You know, sometimes the idea, though, on paper sounds good, intercept. Oh, yeah, we just use the drone to intercept the drone. Problem is, right, the drone has to be able to fly to a moving target that can zigzag and be remotely controlled. And maybe some of the Russian drones are remote controlled, but not all of them are remotely controlled by radio. So, plus you can't jam while you're using interceptor drones. Now, whether or not petrochemicals, whatever, the British, they claim to have destroyed Russia's petrochemical industry and then claim, they attacked it again. Which is it? You destroyed it yesterday or you attacked it again today? You can't destroy something and then attack it again if it's destroyed, right? Now, Russia has dropped leaflets again in Huliaipole ahead of their advance. urging Ukrainians to surrender. The Russian forces have broken through the Ukrainian defences at Huliaipole. The Ukrainians refused to believe that, but the Euromaidan press, now there's a month ago, right? Now they're denying Russia capturing Huliaipole, and then saying control Dnipro. Dnipro is, wait a minute. There's Huliaipole. They think you're idiots. Alright. Unless they think you're idiots. There's Dopropylia, which Zelensky claims again to have been liberated. Russians have not reached Dopropylia. There is no Dopropylia here on the map. Oh, wait, it's up here. And again, Russia, again, that's north. So, again, they don't seem to be very, reporting very well. Near. The word is north, obviously. Just a little mistake. But they're claiming Russian troops disguised as civilians only attempted infiltration. No. Russian troops entered the town, told the Ukrainians that the Russians were coming in force. The Russians did not ask them to surrender or anything. They just left. Okay? They came up, spoke briefly with the Ukrainians. Now, they weren't disguised as civilians. They came up, right, they came across the Ukrainians in their trenches, right, yelled out to them that the rest of their army's coming, and waited. The Ukrainians fled. Now, the Russians who did this were flown to Moscow for congratulations. But, of course, that's kissing Putin's ass, and the Western media can't have that, and Western liberals cannot understand. They deceived the Ukrainian forces. They claimed it for, they were Russian soldiers. They weren't out of uniform. They weren't spies. They crawled up to the Ukrainian lines, called out that the Russians are coming, and the Ukrainians abandoned their post in Huliaipole. Now, Costas here. Enabling the Russians to advance, not far, but the Ukrainians have counter-attacked since. But a few hours ago, Huliaipole was showing the Russians at having up to here. So the Ukrainians have come back and counter-attacked, and now removed this as under Russian control. So, had I not glitched and was able to record earlier, I would have been able to show you and would have had the update in real time as I was recording you, showing you that yes, sometimes Ukraine does get territory back. I've never said they don't, okay? But I've pointed out many times that many Ukrainian counterattacks end up getting slaughtered and the Russians advance. Now here is one of the few times that a Ukrainian counterattack has managed to hold territory for more than a month. But remember, out of the 6 in the last 6 months, it's the only one. Well, it's now the second. It's the only one for now. We have seen a counterattack at Huliaipole. Now we've seen a counterattack here. And yes, Russia's left the railway yard wide open. Why? Because the Ukrainians seem to want to think they're playing call to arms and they're going to pull some railway defence and hide in the carriages like the Russians come out going, hoorah! And oh no, wait a minute, that was the tactics the Russians used in World War II. I think the Russians know that tactic. Battle of Kursk, early days when the Russians came into Kursk, they hidden, not Battle of Kursk, Sevastopol. Liberation of Sevastopol, they hid in railway carts. The Germans didn't have the air power, but they thought that the Russians were only getting resupplies of ammunition and didn't understand that those were men in the railway carts, although the Russians were short of ammunition because they put men in the railway carts. But it didn't matter because when they captured the German rail positions, they had the German ammunition. There was a lot of times in World War II where Russia did capture enemy equipment intact and used it on the Germans. You know, the British used German tanks all the way up until 1958. Well, I think I told you about that. It was they found the gearboxes were improperly spec'd, and once the titanium rods were replaced, the gearboxes worked perfectly. And once the ammunition, they found the German ammunition was contaminated. That's why it didn't work. So Russia's close to surrounding the Ukrainians in Myriad, but they're not going to surround them. This is a Russian tactic. It has been shown time and time again that the Ukrainians will just dig in, but if they're given a way out when the bombardment, a lot of the time they aren't being bombarded, by the way. It's only light artillery and the occasional harassment. But either way, you can't get over the fact that 3 Russians... Now see, it's always a Ukrainian source, and it's always the liberal media that backs them up, right? It's never, ever Western media. Well, see? Western media, there's no story. It's all Ukrainian. It's all propaganda. Al Jazeera is the only one reporting it, and the Russian news is saying 3 heroes deceived, frightened Ukrainians, I think it translated as. And that they'll be awarded Russia's bravery medal or something, and they've earned a reward or something. But it didn't go quite the way they expected. But still, it disrupted the Ukrainian front line and embarrassed Zelensky. So, but reported in the UK now is that UK youth are now being offered a military gap year. They're claiming that military experience will make you a man. Teenagers in Ukraine, in Ukraine, in the United Kingdom, a branch office of the Ukraine will be offered service in the armed forces under a whole new whole of society approach to national defense, which will recruit young people as long as they're white, no refugees, no foreign. They claim it's because of rising tensions with Russia. The tensions are rising because of the media and the Ukraine Glazers in the in the British Ukrainian government, because, they're pretty much got, Keir Starmer is basically doing Zelensky's bidding. Now, this program keeps talking about threats and how they need to organise the British society, and they're offering these kids $35,000 to complete 13 weeks of basic training. They're claiming it's all about opportunities for young people. 13 weeks of basic training. Here's your ear. Look, you learn how to tie your boots, unpack a cut lunch, load a magazine into a rifle, and call for a medic when you cut your finger. Or the Russians call you a mean word and you say, "Thought police, he called me a mean name." Because for 13 weeks, gosh, at least the Americans have a decent training program. 13 weeks? God. It sounds like another government corruption program to me. Now, Zelensky apparently is calling for a referendum, but not on Trump's plan, on his plan. According to Axios, Zelensky's going to put his 20-point peace plan to the referendum after a introduction program in Ukrainian schools. Wait a minute. What has Ukrainian schools got to do with voting? You mean that... Of course, they're claiming that they're talking about tolerance of other various cultures, addressing territorial issues and other bullshit. At the same time, they're asking you to fund an 800,000 Ukrainian army. And they're claiming that they need security guarantees, such as NATO Article 5, revisit Ukraine's non-nuclear status, take over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, no compromise on land, and reparations from Russia. So, Zelensky's 20-point plan is bullshit. Of course, it all hinges at first that first Putin has to leave and stand down, and then we'll negotiate $1 trillion reparations deal for Ukraine. Like I said, Putin's looking at the numbers and going, draw me up a grid. Pick the best, juiciest targets, and let's start systematically destroying them. Now, I thought it would take a month. I was wrong. But Western media won't realise that this is not a turning point, right? Yes, there was a slight counterattack in Kupiansk. Russia hasn't retaken it. Why? Because the cauldron of death is working. Now, in Huliaipole, yes, their trick worked, but not to the extent that the Western media originally thought it did, and then they backtracked, but at least Al Jazeera has kept up the story up and haven't deleted it yet, but as of time of recording, it's still up. But overnight drone attacks, etc., stalled battles, collapsing strongholds, and other developments which Russia won't go into have them optimistic. Now, I think they're talking about Zelensky begging the West, particularly Poland, to round up Ukrainian men. And Poland responded by saying that 78% of Ukrainian men are now working in Poland and just can't be uprooted from their jobs as they're going through the process of becoming Polish citizens. Yeah, so Ukrainians are renouncing their citizenship. They're not going to defend Ukraine. Well, actually, most say it's not that they're not defending Ukraine. Most believe it's defending that the army's being used to defend Zelensky, not and the regime, not defend Ukraine. Now, Russian forces have a foothold in Kupiansk still and in the Konkoslovakia area. Now, they haven't established a foothold south of the city. Okay, there's 4 points, right? You know the bridge in the middle. I've pointed that many times. But there's 3 more points on the outskirts of Kupiansk. Now, Kupiansk is actually a small part. Kovalskia is actually the whole area, right? And Kupiansk is only just a quarter of it. Now, Russia only has a small amount of that territory in each. They have only a foothold and only had a foothold. Now, in November, they had more territory than the front line has moved back since December 21. Russia actually acknowledges this on their map, and they've actually shown that they've lost more territory than the Ukrainian map shows. Russian maps often show less territory than the Ukrainian maps do. But according to Russian sources, there are only 150 to 200 Russian soldiers present. Now, they say it's they can't establish a large presence in the area because of missile attacks, right? And this is throughout the front line. This is a rare insight into Russian strategy, where they're using small unit tactics because large troop movements come under constant missile barrage. And this is what the Russians do to Ukraine, by the way. So, again, in the Lyman area, they've reached the outskirts of Lyman. But Ukrainians are doing a deceptive tactic by showing the marker for Lyman behind the city at the westernmost corner. But looking at the geopolitical map, Lyman's actually much bigger than just the small little area highlighted in the south on the map. Now, according to the Russian map, Lyman was a huge military part of the military supply line to the original front lines, which of course have long since collapsed at Bakhmut. Bakhmut was part of the first Zelensky line. Seversk is one of the last cities. Seversk and Kupiansk were one of the last cities in that line, right? Soledar, Volodar. Now, Pavlovsk and Myriad are the second most populous areas in that region that are still, right? Now, behind them is nearly 100 kilometers of open area. And Ukrainians have been able to establish more stable defenses there, slowing down the Russian advance. Now, Krasny-Lyman is a huge regional town made up of many smaller towns, which include Lyman. And this is not uncommon that you'll find many names repeated and used the same all throughout Ukraine. Now, Krasny-Lyman is a town south of Romanovsk. And for some reason, the Western media seem to keep confusing that with Lyman in Donetsk. Now, Krasny-Lyman has fallen to the Russians, as is Pavlovsk. Now, Pavlovsk actually has several towns around it which have also fallen. But Myronod has a town between it that's fallen, but not Myronod itself, except in the south. It's not completely overrun. Now, Huliaipole was recently taken. It's north of Konsk. And this is actually where Russia's reporting where they couldn't capture it until they were able to cross the river, and the Ukrainians themselves found themselves encircled. They only had a 30-kilometre stretch of the front line under their control. And, yeah, a couple of Russian tricksters decided to tell them that the whole Russian army was coming. But it enabled them to capture part of Huliaipole yesterday and capture Huliaipole and other areas. But no, they're still fighting throughout Huliaipole after an hour. So Russia's not withdrawing. Yet US Mirror claims the Russians lost Huliaipole and withdrawing. That is not true. They're not withdrawing from Kupiansk. They have been pushed out of parts of Kupiansk. But it's a much larger area than the maps show you. The Ukrainian maps. We'll go here and I'll show you on the Ukrainian map. See, here. Savite, right? There's the town between these two. This open area here is part of Ravine. Right. Moriod, this is part of Moriod, even though there's actually a field almost cutting it in two. Only part of this field here is part of this town, but the field on the other of the road and the other side, and this little corner here, is Moriod. Now, it seems Ukraine often marks off more areas than the Russians have taken, which means Ukraine is already ceding ground to the Russians as they retreat. What they mean by the steppes, these parts here, right? All this, right? North of the mountains. And, yeah, Russians have to hurdle uphill, and the Ukrainians have the high ground on the crest, and they have further defences behind, which stop the Russians from encircling or going around them, like they did it to the Germans in World War II, who decided to only defend the coast. Here we go. Kupiansk is this little corner here, up to the river, this down here, right? Here you have Uravani and others, but this is all part of even this. Krasnovoikia on the political map is this whole area, including this. Now the Ukrainian map is showing actually the Russians in this area and have more of Kupiansk than this map shows. But if you go to the other Russian maps, it shows far less, right, than this map does. This area here, right, but it does, but now and again, right, there's all troop movement and patrols, right? This whole area is patrolled, not controlled. Okay, the Ukrainians have not stationed many troops in here, nor have the Russians. The bitter cold, it's just bitter cold, not much shelter. Yeah. So, yeah, Huliaipole is ahead of the advance. And that's the state of the war. It is still going quite slow. The weather is quite bad. Trump believes that he still has a good shot of reaching a peace agreement. Zelensky is apparently going to get off his ass, but according to the Euro press, Zelensky's only having a phone call with Trump on the 27th. That is, now we don't know, but according to other news, Zelensky made a call to arrange a meeting. So there are multiple reports. I think this is deliberate, so that but according to some, Zelensky has already gone to Mar-a-Lago and met with Trump. This is the US Mirror, but the Daily Mail and others said no, Zelensky's on his way. So I don't know if this is deliberate misreporting of Zelensky's location, because it's definitely not the 28th in the US, and Trump is not in Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Trump is on his way, according to the White House. So again, I think the media's written the stories and published them before the events happen. They do this before, right? They speculate, write the story, and just say and normally release it just as the news cycle hits, so that everybody's talking about the story and not what's happening, right? Because remember, the media does not thrive on the truth, it thrives on clicks. That's why they pander to the most outrageous conspiracies that, Trump and Epstein, even though Epstein didn't own Little St. James Island at the time, that Trump flew from Florida to New York. It's ridiculous. But that's what the media do. They leave stuff out so they can't be accused of lying. But it's still a lie. It's a lie by omission. So that's the state. But the media want this war. Okay, it's like you go back and look at World War I and the headlines leading up to World War II. They wanted war, okay? The media fooled people in the war, but then this time it's not working. Right? For 4 years they haven't been able to get consensus in Europe for a war because the people keep saying, no. The French army particularly has refused to leave barracks. They even said, okay, we'll just take the 3,000, loyal soldiers, as they called them, and send them to Ukraine. But then even Macron's loyalists wouldn't go to Ukraine, because 3,000 against, maybe if it was, 3,000, might have been a big army once upon a time, but there's 800,000 Russians, plus Donbass volunteers, and adding up another 677,000, in reserve, and then you add another 2.4 million in the regular army, Navy, Air Force, and regular reserves and rocket forces, and then you add security, police, and trained personnel. You're looking at a total of around 3.6 million compared to Europe's 800,000. And of that, 3,000 were going to be sent to Ukraine to do what? Play tiddlywinks? Be target practice? Wouldn't last a month. 3,000. They lose over 1,000 a day in Ukraine. Now, of course, that doesn't count self-deletions and people who die in bombings. We do not know the entire death toll and probably never will for years. It'll be like World War II. You won't get the truth for 100 years. And by the time, this is all to protect the guilty, folks. Always to protect the guilty, particularly in the media. See, they want you deceived. They want you poor. They don't want you to know the truth. The truth shall set you free is not a slogan. It is a saying for a reason. It's common sense. If you know who to trust and who not to trust, right, you'll never be deceived again. And that's the problem, isn't it? Liberals are liars who like to be deceived. They like deception. They like arguing. They like clutching their pearls and claiming that Trump's not presidential. Well, Obama dropped a bomb every day. Bombed the wedding, killed women and children without mercy or even acknowledgement. They won't acknowledge their sins. So they think, oh, well, if we could deny it, it never happened. And that's the problem with the world right now. Right? Europe is still in a state of mostly self-denial that they're fascists. And they're only upset. Well, I can understand them being upset that the Germans in the 30s lied to them. But here's the thing, folks. It's the same with communism. Every collectivism, right? When you want a single dominating ideology, it will, like Islam or liberalism, it will always turn fascist because it has to It can't stand other ideas. It has to stomp out other ideas, and eventually gets more and more authoritarian. The more and keep calling for unity. Keep calling for unity. And then when it finally goes too far, then they turn against it. And then say, that wasn't real communism. But it is real communism. Whether you want to call it communism or fascism, or it's all collectivism. Ukraine is just a test case, right? Draw us into a war, keep us distracted, keep us in fighting, instead of realizing, the fact is, right, Ukrainians just don't know who to trust, right? They've been betrayed. They feel betrayed by every president of Ukraine. Every Ukrainian president, even Zelensky. And they don't know what to do because Europe won't help them. They do want an end to the war. But it's Zelensky, it's Ursula always lying, it's Merkel, Macron, and Keir Starmer who keep pushing Ukraine to fight on because their supporters keep pushing Ukraine to fight on because all these false Christians want their David Goliath moment, They want to feel that they're heroes. Because they hate Russia so much. And it's not because of it's not because Putin was KGB or because he invaded Ukraine, but because Russia won't bow to them. Russia won't bow to the WEF. Russia won't bow to the gay, trans agenda. And I know Russia's gone too far. There's animes they've banned. There's many reasons what not to like Russia. But it's not our country. It's not our right to interfere with Russia. All these people who complain about Russian interference are nothing more than brainwashed muppets. They're interfering in Ukraine. They're interfering in Russia. Fuck Finland. And their bloody paranoia about Russian invasions. Sorry, gone on far too long. Thank you all for watching. Please help the channel. I really need it. I really appreciate those who help the channel. There's Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links in the link tree. Whoops, too far. And I'll see you all in the next video. Bye for now.